Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host Tom D'Ambra, and as always we are very thankful that you spend your busy day with us. Recently we have been showing to you and demonstrating to you some DVDs that if you had the opportunity to view them should make you ask some very pertinent questions with regards to the events of 9/11. We've also demonstrated to you that things are not quite the way we get to see them. I think we had a famous quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt that nothing happens in politics by chance. So what we want to do now is, now that we've asked some questions, we've demonstrated to you some of the falsehoods that were reported to the American people, and by some very pertinent people. For instance, if you remember at the Pentagon, we had the quote from Jamie McIntyre, one of the leading investigative reporters from CNN, that when he got to the Pentagon, he didn't see any sign of a plane crash. There was no fuselage, no wings, and so forth. We also demonstrated how, supposedly a 757 with wingspan fit into a 16-foot hole and so forth. We also demonstrated the demolitions at the Twin Towers and all the questions that went along with it. All the eyewitness accounts of secondary explosions from the firemen, from the policemen, from EMS personnel, and from the people who were in the buildings themselves. We also, if you remember, folks, got into how the battalion chief, the safety officer for the New York City Fire Department, actually started pulling the firemen out because of secondary explosions, and how he made the quote to NBC News that he felt that there were devices planted in the buildings. So we have to ask these type of questions because what we're after here is truth, and we have to also ask, why would they do this type of thing? Why have an event like this? We also have gotten into the Hegelian dialect on this program, how they no longer do it with the barrel of a gun. Basically, they create a crisis to get a reaction from the people so they can provide the solution. And of course, the solution always strengthens their authority. It always gathers revenue for them. We've gotten into who are them. Who are the puppet masters, if you would, of the puppets that we're allowed to see? And we've come to the conclusion, and quite effectively, that there is a banking cartel, an international banking cartel, that is not only implementing these programs and these episodes to get the reaction from you, but also this banking cartel controlling our money system, or as we've demonstrated in previous shows, the lack of a money system. If you remember how we took out our law dictionary, and we also took out the coinage acts, the 4 coinage acts of the founding era of this country, and demonstrated quite well to you that by the definition of money, through the Black's Law Dictionary and through the coinage acts of this nation, we do not have money per se, we have legal tender. And actually, if you remember, we went over the different language on the dollar, what a dollar is not, and obviously today we do not have dollars. So what's going on with 9/11? What's happened to our country post-event? And you'll find that basically what's happened to our country post-event is the same thing that happened to 1933 Germany when Hitler burned the Reichstag building to create the crisis. And he got the proper reaction that he desired from the German people. He went forward with a set of programs called the Enabling Acts, where he actually created the position of Führer and appointed himself the Führer. Okay, you have to remember, folks, that number one, Adolf Hitler was an Austrian. He was not German. I know that a lot of people have a hard time believing that, but that's historical fact. The other thing you have to understand is that he was elected by the people to be Chancellor of Germany. Okay, when Hitler came into play, there was no position of Führer. Okay, through the Enabling Acts that he created the position of Führer and appointed himself to that position, which consolidated all the power of the German government into his hands. Okay, very, very similar to what's going on in this country with regards to the Homeland Security Acts and the Patriot Acts and so forth, Presidential Directive 51, and other things that have taken our checks and balances of our original form of the government that we have in play, and went to basically consolidating all the powers of our government to one entity, to one branch of that government, and it's through the executive branch. Because obviously, it's a lot easier to control one entity, one person being the president, than it is 535 members of the Senate and the House. So what they've done is they've consolidated power in very much the same way that Hitler did in previous history. If you do remember, folks, from reading your Constitution, only the Congress can declare war. Once the war is declared, then the president, through the executive authorities, becomes commander-in-chief. Okay, but first the Congress has to declare war. And we have not declared war in this country since December 8th, 1941. And look at all the excursions, wars, police actions, conflicts, whatever you wish to call them, that we've incurred since then. And what's happened at that point, besides the horrific murdering and butchering of millions, literally millions of people, is the profits to the bankers. Because what takes place with war? You have to facilitate the war. And to facilitate war, you have to gain credit to facilitate the products and necessities of war. Do you remember the famous quote we had from Lincoln from, it was many shows ago, but we took it from Lincoln's journal when he was talking about, I have the Confederate Army at my front door, and I have the international banksters at my back door, and for the future of my nation, it is the banksters I fear the most. And the reason he feared the banksters is because he had to, at that point, acquire credit to facilitate the war. But what happened was they were going to charge him 24%. And if you remember, we got into how Lincoln went forward with the power and faith of the United States government and issued greenbacks. And then the bankers were losing power at that point. But what was taking place was people were still using the banker's script, if you would, for exchange of currency. So what Lincoln did then was he mandated through an executive order that, okay, to pay taxes, you're only going to be able to use greenbacks. So the banker's script would not be allowed for payment of taxes, so everybody flocked to the greenbacks so they would have the ability to pay their taxes, because why would you take risk, and why would you labor for an entity, an exchange, a medium exchange that you would not be able to pay your taxes with, okay? It was becoming more devalued because people didn't want it also. So it was a very smart ploy by Lincoln's part, and it did facilitate his desires with regards to getting people to use the greenback and not have to go into such a debt with regards to the foreign bankers, and they were the foreign bankers. Again, we got into how the Rothschilds and so forth were behind a lot of this. So war is a very, very profitable instrument, and is always desired by the bankers. If you remember, 1989, the communist wall fell, the wall that divided East Germany and West Germany, okay? Well, folks, it took merely 19 months, that was it, and all of a sudden we have a new enemy, the Muslim enemy, and we have Gulf War I by 1991, okay? You always have to have crises. You always have to have a threat. You always have to have an enemy. And we also got into in previous shows how, the king and queens and magistrates of England were related. They were blood relatives, okay? And what they did was there was a lot of civil unrest inside of France, and there was a lot of civil unrest inside of England. So what they decided to do was to create a war to get all this anger and animosity and energy focused on an outside threat. So what they did was they stopped looking locally, and now the perceived threat that was threatening them was from the outside. And it was very, very effective, because what these folks like to do is they understand the psychologically motivations of the common man. They've studied it tremendously. And when you read some of their books that they have studied, you'll find, folks, that, again, this Hegelian dialect is very effective for them, problem, reaction, solution. But what war does is it solidifies the people. So they usually like to wrap crises in one of two ways. They wrap it in the flag with patriotism and an outside threat, or they wrap it in religion for this outside threat. You know, the Muslims want to eliminate the Christians and the Sunni and the Tetsus, all this. This is what they do. They wrap this all in these two entities because this is the foundation of most people's psyche. Most people are very, very patriotic, and they feel by being patriotic, they're looking out for the well-being of their country and hence their family and friends. And the other end of it is most people are very orchestrated through religion. So these two areas are very, very sensitive areas to get the reaction from the people that they desire. So with these crises, what they like to do is bring it right to your front door. Okay, 1964, we had the war on poverty. And, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was president at the time, we're going to declare war on poverty. Well, what they actually wound up doing, folks, is one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto, and that was they started to redistribute wealth. And they first did it, remember Johnson saying, oh, we're going to, take from the has and give to the has-nots. Well, that was supposed to be just within the country. And now we find that, the current president is actually having welfare abroad. That's right. Your welfare dollars now are going abroad, folks. You're going to different countries throughout the world. All right. Same with the bailout money. $23.7 trillion. Of course, we don't have dollars, but $23.7 trillion of these Federal Reserve notes that you have to labor and your children have to labor for the rest of your lives to pay the interest on this. Okay. Went to foreign banks, foreign insurance companies, all right? And what they did with a lot of this money is they actually bought up positive assets, okay? When you start, and we're going to, in a couple of weeks, we're going to do a show on, okay, what happened to the $23.7 trillion? And what you're going to discover is that a lot of this monies was taken to buy up positive assets, things that were still operating in the black. They were productive and they were profitable. All right, folks, $23.7 trillion, and there wasn't a mortgage paid in this country. When you look at the total mortgage liability in this country at the time of that, it was $9.8 trillion. So if they really wanted to free up credit, if they really wanted to alleviate the burden on the American people, all right, for $9.8 trillion, they could have eliminated every single mortgage in this country. But what did they do? They took $23.7 trillion and bought up and consolidated their power. And that's exactly where we are today. And you got to think of this now, okay? We get permission through merely an entry on a data to print money. Okay, there's no, as we've demonstrated quite well in the show, there is no intrinsic value backing up your money. What's actually backing up this money is your labors, okay, and the labors of your children. So what they've done is not only consolidated power, but they have taken whatever liability may fall upon them and shifted it to the United States government. And who were the laborers for the United States government? Yourself. And this is exactly what they've done. So they reap the gain, you reap the liability. And this is where we are. So with that being said, what's a couple of crises? I know I want to get into one little thing quick, and then we're going to get into war. The profitability of war, the mechanisms of war. Do you remember about 4 shows ago we got into some of the top 10 false flag operations in the history of man. We got into the Reichstag building, and with Hitler we got into the false flag operation that Hitler did on the German border, supposedly having Polish uniformed soldiers attacking a radio station on the Polish-German border, finding out that, wow, these Polish soldiers were actually German military dressed into Poland, and they broadcast this over the radio system and so forth. So again, they got the German people who at the time were a very, very educated people, a very cultural people, because they perceived this threat, okay? And so with this threat, what they did was, hence World War II, all right? And you also got to remember something, folks. You cannot create a dictator or an empire without someone financing you. It's really very simple, okay? Hitler could not have done what he did without being financed to facilitate his movement. You can't look at that's just the reality of the situation. All right. So whenever you see like these illegal immigrants, having 500,000 people marching on Washington D.C. and they have all these posters and they have food carts and they have water carts and they have outhouses for people and they have directions and they have logistical support all the way through this operation. These illegal immigrants are supposed to be so poor and desolate that they can barely make themselves over the border. So who transported all these people to Washington, D.C. in an orderly, logistical fashion? These signs were all brand new. They were high-priced signs, these banners, the food, all of this. Again, who facilitated this through financing? Because the illegal immigrants didn't. They didn't have the financing to do this. They probably don't even know where Washington, D.C. is, in all honesty. If you probably gave them a map and said, go to point A to point B, they probably couldn't do it. The buses, by the busloads of people that brought them there, for the fuel, for the drivers, for the insurance, the pickup points, the organization. Okay, who facilitated all this? So every time you're looking at your TV screen and you see, oh, these protests here or this there, you have to ask yourself, well, how do these 500,000 immigrants, number one, organize themselves, and how they get there, and who facilitated them? There is a reasoning behind all of it. And again, it's to get a reaction from you. Very, very important that you understand that. So I want to get into a little bit, we did discuss Adolf Hitler a little bit here. And what I want to do is get into briefly that, who financed Hitler? Who financed the Third Reich? All right? And very, very important that you understand this, because you're going to find out that the Third Reich was financed through the United States and foreign bankers that are controlling your money system in your lives right now. This is from a book called George Bush, The Unauthorized Biography by Webster Topley. And folks, if you don't know who Webster Topley is, he's a modern-day historian, and I will tell you that he sees through the smoke and mirrors. He sees beyond the dog and pony show that we're supposed to absorb and follow. All right, he really is. He's a dramatic and fantastic researcher. And I just want to be real brief here with regards to what Webster Topley had to say about the financing of the Third Reich. George W. Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush, was the managing director of the investment bank Brown Brothers Harriman from the 1920s to the 1940s. It was Brown Brothers, in conjunction with Averell Harriman, the Rockefeller family, Standard Oil Company of New York, the DuPonts, the Morgans, and the Fords, which served as the principal funding arm in helping to finance Adolf Hitler's rise to power starting in 1923. This included the direct funding for the SS. Very, very important that these folks have a controlling mechanism domestically. Most of your state police were brought into play in 1933 when the bankers, through our insolvency, took over this country. They took over the money system in 1913, as we've demonstrated with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And it only took them a very short time to facilitate a situation where the government, as you know it, the corporation called the government, went insolvent to them. And at that point, they needed a domestic strong arm, if you would, to control the masses. And this is all done through incrementation, okay? This is all done, get your foot in the door, then another step, and the steps get greater, and so forth, okay? So this is what's going on. When you look at the financing patterns of the Third Reich, one of the first things they did was form the SS. And the reason why they did that, again, is because they needed a domestic army. Now, our current president, President Obama, is talking about we need to have a domestic force as well funded and as well trained and as well as equipped as our military to take the burden off of our military. Well, this should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, because this is quite exactly what Adolf Hitler said to the German people when he had announced the formation of the SS. almost verbatim with the language here. Let's continue. Early support from Hitler came from Prescott Bush through the Hamburg America line, also funded by the Brown brothers. That funneled large sums of money and weapons to Hitler's stormtroopers in the 1920s. Calling President Bush Hitler's angel in the 1942 edition of the New York Herald Tribune. Folks, I want you to think about this. Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, in a 1942 article from a very reputable, I should say a very popular, not reputable, newspaper called the New York Herald Tribune, called Prescott Bush Hitler's angel. What does an angel do? An angel looks out. An angel is a beneficiary. An angel is something that you look to for benevolence. Let's continue. Calling Prescott Bush Hitler's angel in 1942 edition of the New York Herald Tribune reported that Adolf Hitler's financier held $3 million for Nazi bigwigs in the Union Bank. Prescott Bush was one of the New York Bank's 7 directors. His son and grandson would become U.S. presidents in the shadow of the swastika. Now listen to this quote. The Bush family fortune came from the Third Reich. Former U.S. Justice Department and Nazi war crime investigator John Loftus told the Sarasota Herald Tribune in November of 2000. Think of that, okay? This is the Brown Brothers Harriman, Union Bank out of New York, funding the Third Reich, Hitler's movement in Germany. And the fund manager between the Union Bank of New York and the Reich Bank of Germany was the grandfather of George W. Bush. This is exactly, and this wasn't an aberration, folks. This was not an aberration. This is a continuing history which continues today. War solidifies the people to move them in the direction that is wanted, and it creates profits for the bankers, and all you do is bleed. They profit, you bleed. They profit, your sons, your daughters bleed. And if you don't bleed, then you have to live with the horrors of war, and you carry the baggage around with you for the rest of your life. So the next time this country wants to just send you off to war, you may want to ask, qui bono, who's benefiting here? Are you benefiting? Are the Afghanistan people benefiting? Did the people of Iraq benefit? Did the American people benefit? No. Who did benefit from 9/11? The government strengthened their authorities, strengthened outrageous and lavish budgets, controlled the masses of the people. Private companies that are financed through the government, Halliburton, Kellogg and Root, KRB, all these people have profited, all right, through war. And let's think about the private bank that we know is the Federal Reserve. How much have they profited? Because who's financed this war? Folks, we're into debt. We don't have a money system. We have no intrinsic value. We're operating on debt. Remember we went over the language, Federal Reserve note? What was a note? We looked it up in Black's Law Dictionary. An acknowledgement of debt. This is where we are, okay? And to make this change, it's going to take you getting off the couch. It's going to take you getting active. And that's the reason why we're having this show. And not just this show, but shows throughout the country, throughout the world for that matter. Okay? Now, when you get into war itself, it's obvious that the common man doesn't want to go to war. Of course, they glorify war through television and propaganda. Remember our famous quote from Napoleon Bonaparte about history? History is agreed upon lies by the victors. Okay? They glamatize war. War is horrific. It's the most brutal thing that man can do to man. And it's very, very profitable if you're on the right side of it. When you study Operation Canned Meat and so forth, which we got into on previous shows about what Hitler did to create the crisis, to get the people to want to go to war with Poland. During the Nuremberg trials, what came out with that was they really got into manipulating the people. Because you got to understand, folks, the German people were a very, very educated people. They were very proud people, very cultured people, all right? And a lot of people in the United States, Charles Lindbergh and so forth and others, did not want to go to war. As a matter of fact, there was a great movement in this country to keep the United States out of both world wars, World War I and World War II. But what the bankers did, because by 1924 and into 1929, they basically controlled the major outlets of news in this country. Okay, they formed the UPI and the AP and so forth, and that was to consolidate the information. That's exactly why they did that. So what they did was they manipulated things through a series of events. Okay, and we've gone over some of them events, and I'm not going to be redundant and get back into it, but just another good reason to watch the show. But what they did through manipulating these events is, again, get the reaction from the people. You remember we got into the Gulf of Tonkin with the USS Maddox, according to the Defense Secretary Bob McNamara, and according to the captain of the USS Maddox, which was an American destroyer that was sailing through the Gulf of Tonkin at the time. Supposedly was attacked by Vietnamese patrol boats and so forth, which led to a war of 16 years, the murdering of 1.5 million people, the killing of 60,000 Americans, and a brutal, brutal period in American history, a very tumultuous and dividing period in American history. All right, all on a facade, all on an event that never took place, even according to the people that were there and according to the people that orchestrated it. It never happened. And yet the Vietnam War took place for 16 years. You got to understand, folks, that the media, and I keep saying we're going to have a show on the media, and we're going to do that, but the media in this country is controlled by the very same people who are controlling your money system. And that's why every day, 24/7, 365, the news is the same, whether it's television, print, or radio. I don't care what station, what channel, what media, it's always the same. You think that happens by chance? Do you think that's just, oh boy, just happening? No, that's being coordinated. That's being a deliberate action for your mind. There's a fellow out in the movement that has a very I like the saying. He said, there's a war on for your mind. Absolutely true. There is a war on for your mind because your mind is controlling all of it. Your mind is controlling your actions. Your mind is controlling what questions you ask. Your mind is controlling whether you're going to get off the couch and get fed up enough to get active to get our republic back. Okay? This is where we are. But the guise of war, I think, is summed up very well. This is from the Nuremberg trial, like I said. And this is Hitler's right-hand man. This is Hermann Goering. And he's explaining this strategy on basically how to manipulate a people, okay? And what goes on with the manipulation. And I want you to listen to his words. And again, folks, this is all under oath. This is the Nuremberg trial. This, again, Mr. Goering. Why, of course, the people don't want war? Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in Germany, for that matter. This is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along. Whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship, voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the biddings of their leaders. That is quite easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Very, very much so. You should pay attention to them words because that is exactly what goes on. Create the crisis, get the reaction from you, provide the solution. I think them words are very, very hard hitting. On another show, folks, we told you that we were going to get into, we talked a little bit about Ted Gunderson, the former FBI agent, who Ronald Reagan went up to in the 1980s and said, hey, look, you know, this cocaine is a menace to my country. I want to know who's supplementing it, who's financing it, where it's coming from, the logistics of it. You're going to answer to me and Al Haig only. I'm going to eliminate the bureaucratic chain. You put together your team and you tell me what you need to complete this investigation, and you get back to me with concrete answers with a foundation of evidence. Okay? And if you remember in the previous shows, we gave you the very famous quote by Ted Gunderson, who said, when Ronald Reagan asked him, oh, okay, you know, Ted, what did you discover? And he went up to the President Ronald Reagan and quite bluntly and said, Mr. President, the biggest drug dealer in the world is the United States government. Okay. Now, I know some of you may find that hard to believe because we have all these anti-drug laws and all these policies of roadblocks, and we can kick in your door and all this. But who benefits from that? Okay. We have a strengthening police force. We have a people willing to give up their rights and liberties because we have this perceived threat of the drugs, of the cocaine. All right. We have the black ops funding that's going on from the profit of the operation itself, of the cocaine itself. Because, folks, remember, as they strengthen the police force and make more stringent laws against the use of the drugs, well, the risk factor goes up to transport and or sell the drugs, okay? So with the risk factor going up, what else goes up? The cost of the product goes up, because I'm not willing to take the risk to be caught to go to jail for a little profit. So the cost is going to go up. And when the cost goes up, what else goes up, which is the ultimate goal, is the profit. And I'm not talking about the two-penny guy on the street dealing. I'm talking about the people bringing it in by the boat and plane loads. The profit margins go up. They strengthen their authority. They get more tax revenue for their budgets. And the people accept this because of this perceived threat. And you got to understand that. So I know a lot of folks would find it hard to believe that the United States government is involved with drug operations. Okay? Do you remember we talked about what was the second piece of land that we secured when we went into Afghanistan? The second piece of land. Was it going after Osama bin Forgotten? No, it wasn't. It was the Golden Crescent. Remember we spoke about the Golden Crescent, the #1 growing area for poppy in the entire world. That was the second area that we secured. If you remember, for 14 years, the Taliban had outlawed the growing of poppy. And the CIA and Mossad and other agencies were losing trillions of dollars in unaccountable black ops money. Okay? And who else was losing money here, folks? Because all this black ops money, and we're going to get into this in a future show, is all laundered through the Federal Reserve banking system and the International Monetary Fund. So it was a quadruple loss for the bankers. Something had to be done. And it all played out rather well with saying that Osama bin Laden, oh, by the way, who needs dialysis every week, is hiding in a cave somewhere in Bora Bora, Afghanistan. I got a bridge. Folks, if you're that gullible that you can believe that, and without, just take that because somebody on a TV screen presented that information to you, and you can't think for yourself and say, wait a minute, how is it that a man who needs dialysis every week can be hiding out in a cave in Bora Bora, Afghanistan? No electricity, no dialysis machine, not even running water. How is he doing that? Do you remember we got into in July of 2001, and we showed it to you verbatim, how Osama bin Laden was in the American University Hospital in Dubai for dialysis, and according to the hospital records, he met with the local CIA station chief on three occasions. We read that was verbatim, folks. All right? So you have to ask yourself, why? Why would we go into Afghanistan supposedly looking for a person who was supposedly responsible for the greatest terrorist attack in the history of this country, all right? But yet, and we never found him. It's almost 2010, all right? It's 9 years later, we never found him. I have a hard time believing that. But anyway, let's get back to the drugs, because I really want to go over something with you with regards to William Casey. Now, William Casey was the CIA director, as most of you know, and he died very mysteriously. And if you remember, he was found on a boat on a river, and he died very mysteriously. And what William Casey was, I'm going to get into a little reason why William Casey was taken out, if you would, or we'll just say died mysteriously. He started to talk. William Casey was an elderly gentleman, and he started to talk, but he didn't start to talk out of remorse, being sorry for his actions and what he did. He started to talk braggishly. He started to talk matter-of-factly, publicly, about the operations and what was going on. Now, I'm just going to read this. This is a page and a half, or actually full page, and bear with me and listen to the events that are taking place here, and listen to the names of the players. Okay, very important, because when you listen to the names of the players, a part of this whole operation, ask yourself, key bono, what happened to the players after this operation? Okay, here we go. This is December 9th in 1986 in Virginia, okay? And what goes on here, I just want you to listen, and again, pay attention to the players. I, William Casey, declare. So he is making a formal statement here, all right? And this is when things started getting a little etchy for William Casey, because the bankers couldn't have this. They can't have a man of such importance and such a public position, all right, making these public declarations about the drug operations of the United States government. But let's listen to what he had to declare. I, William J. Casey, declare, I have found that freedom is a priceless commodity that demands constant vigilance to guarantee its longevity. I was told that A7 was the Phoenix program of Latin America. It involved the assassination of communist infrastructure throughout Latin America. Now, folks, stop right there. We haven't even got to the drugs yet. We're getting to the United States government through the CIA and other agencies actually assassinating communist infrastructure throughout Latin America. Now, when they're talking about infrastructure, folks, they're talking about the people of position. They're not talking about blowing up a bridge. They're talking about political infrastructure. They're talking about the people involved with different movements throughout Latin and South America. Okay, this is what they're talking about. So when he says infrastructure, he's speaking politically here. Colby candidly informed me that he had prepositioned more than 1 million pounds of cocaine in Panama between December 1975 and April of 1976. This was done with the aid of our gallantly General Manuel Noriega. Now, you may say, boy, Noriega didn't make out too well. He wound up in a prison in Florida. Okay, remember when George Bush first president number 42 went into Panama? Okay. The reason why we went into Panama, remember Noriega was this bad guy. He was being brutal to the people, ha, ha, ha. Noriega and George Bush had a long, long-term relationship. And it began when George Bush was the director of the CIA. George Bush, number one. George Bush, when he was the director of the CIA, facilitated this entire operation, okay? The cocaine was transported into El Salvador, Costa Rica, Honduras between 1976 and 1981. Colby now sat in front of me with hat in hand and requested my help in the delivery of the cocaine to the American market. Okay, so what's going on here? Through Black Ops, they've consolidated 1 million pounds of cocaine. All right, and that's really saying something when you think about I was never into the drug scene, but I believe cocaine was sold by grams. And for you reloaders out there, you understand what a gram is, but it's a very small number. So you're talking about 1 million pounds of an entity that is sold by grams. How much profit are we thinking of here, folks? Key bono. And where do they want to move it? Into the American market. They're looking for a way to get my help in the delivery of the cocaine to the American market. So much for the war on drugs, huh? They got 1 million pounds of cocaine sitting there in these 3 nations, in South America and Latin America, and they're looking for a means to facilitate transportation into the nation of our nation, the United States. And the American market, folks, would also include Canada, okay? But primarily here, they're talking about the United States. By 1984, all pre-positioned cocaine had arrived in Mina Airport and additional cocaine sources were secured. Cocaine was being transshipped through the hangars 4 and 5 at Hoppango Air Base in El Salvador. My point man at Mina was Barry Seal. Now, where is Mina? Do the research. Mina is in Mina, Arkansas. Who was the governor of Arkansas in this time period? You know him as the future president at that time, Bill Clinton. Okay? Key bono. Not to mention all the money Bill Clinton made for himself and his wife and through the Rose Law Firm and all that, protecting these people, making sure his attorney general and the local police forces would be, diverted to other operations and kept away from this. Okay? Bill Clinton. As a matter of fact, when you continue, they actually mention Bill Clinton by name. Bill Clinton has proved to be invaluable so far by containing the local law enforcement investigations into the intelligence activity at Mina. Folks, in this document, they're naming him by name. What'd they do in the future from him? They made him president of the United States. Why? Do you think they were indebted to him? No, these people don't play that way. Because if Bill Clinton had an indebtedness, okay, there was no indebtedness here, folks. This is about who's going to play, who's going to sit at the table, and who's not going to sit at the table. Who's going to be allowed to come to the dinner plate, and who's not going to be allowed to come to the dinner plate, okay? And Bill Clinton sat at the table and ate from the dinner plate. They knew that they could count on him to carry out their operations. They made him president. Oh, and you thought you elected him. Not so. Okay, so I want to read that one more time to you. Bill Clinton has proved invaluable so far by containing the local law enforcement investigations into the intelligence activity at Mina. Now think about this. What does that say about the character of the whole conglomerate of people that you look up to through this dog and pony show with admiring eyes for this benevolent organization that you know is the government? All right? They fine you. They give more strict laws. They have roadblocks because we got to check for the cocaine. Oh, and don't let them catch you smoking marijuana, even though it has medical purposes, and if you pay your extortion fee, we'll let you smoke it. They're bringing in the cocaine. Folks, this is in the 80s. Now they're bringing in the heroin in this country through Afghanistan. I ordered John Poindexter. Now, you got to understand John Poindexter, Robert McFarlane, and Oliver North. You probably remember some of these names from a thing called Iran-Contra, okay? I ordered John Poindexter, Robert McFarlane, and Oliver North to go outside normal channels and use available assets, including the mafia. So now we have a working relationship with the mafia. And why? Because the mafia is like, Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. They already have this distribution system not only facilitated, but it's logistically in operation. All right? Because when they had the war on alcohol through the Prohibition, oh, and by the way, what Prohibition, folks, what took place out of Prohibition? Wow. We actually had, we had these federal laws against drinking, so we had to have a federal agency to enforce the laws. So we had 14 years of Prohibition. Did we get rid of the ATF after that? No. We strengthened the ATF. We created the crisis. We got the reaction from you that we wanted. We facilitated ourselves through providing the solution. And even though the problem went away because we did away with prohibition, we still maintained the ATF. Because as we've demonstrated before on the show, the federal government is not supposed to be involved in law enforcement. Territories, enclaves, and districts only, not within the states. So back to Oliver North and so forth. In Oliver North, to go outside normal channels and use available assets, including the mafia, to ensure the arrival of the cocaine into Mina Airport. The arrival occurred in no small part through the efforts of personnel assigned to the National Security Agency. Folks, you understand what I'm saying here? Okay? You've got the government, through the CIA, facilitating the buildup of 1 million pounds of cocaine in 3 different countries down in South America and Latin America. Now they're looking for a mechanism of transport to get it into the marketplace in America. And who are they using? They're using the mafia that they supposedly, try to prosecute because they're so bad and evil and they're here to take advantage of you. And not only that, when they're using the mafia at the local level for distribution, for the big picture to go from country to country, they're using the National Security Agency. And there's more. We use the assignment of the National Security Agency and the Army Security Agency. Folks, does the Army go through customs checks? I don't think so. Why don't they go through customs checks? Because they're the government. So you've got 1 non-governmental and 2 governmental, actually 3 governmental agencies, all working together in a unified effort to bring cocaine, a very detrimental drug with a high abuse factor, here in the United States, and to get it into your hands and the hands of your children for the profits of the bankers and for the consolidation of authority. The men and women of the NSA and ASA, and again, that's the National Security Agency and the Army Security Agency, blinded early warning defense satellites and radar grid to enable aircraft to land undetected at Mina Airport in Arkansas. The NSA and ASA operations were Sea Spray and Jade Bridge. Think of that. This was such a high-level operation that they had the ability, through these 2 operations, Sea Spray and Jade Bridge, that was the codenames of the operations, okay, to go ahead and actually divert satellite coverage so these planes could fly through their appointed and prospective routes without any interference. This is high, upper echelon government drug activity and peddling, okay? Folks, this should really make you understand where we are. And this should also make you understand to keep asking, key bono, who's benefiting here? Is the cocaine user benefiting here? Obviously not. There is no one who has ever bettered themselves by the use of drugs. Nobody. Whether it's cocaine, whether it's heroin, I don't care what it is. It's very detrimental to you psychologically, spiritually, and physically. Okay? They know this, but it's also very addictive. Okay? The addiction of cocaine is incredibly high, and they know this. And they know the more they create the authority, the higher the risk value goes, the higher the cost, the higher the profitability for them. And they're benefiting multiple ways. They're benefiting through the people giving up, like I said, giving up their lights, through the funding for the operations with regards to law enforcement, through the authority that's been expanded, and through the black ops profitability of the money itself. And then the bank is also profiting because all this money has to be laundered, folks. And when I say laundered, it has to be washed. It has to be blended into the system to be accountable legitimately. There's a big percentage when you've got to do an operation like that. Very, very important you understand this. And this is from William Casey himself. This isn't me making this up. This is William Casey. I, William J. Casey, declare. Okay? This is why William Casey died of questionable means. My actions may be recorded as criminal, condemning countless Americans to drug dependency. I don't care. All wars produce casualties. Generally, the more violent the war, the shorter the length. My choice was either to stare down a protracted Cold War guerrilla insurgency in Latin America or use the means available to me to finance and wage a violent war of short duration for democracy. I stand by my decisions. The tool is cocaine. The trick is to understand that the drug user had the freedom to make a choice. They chose the drug. I choose to use their habit to finance the democracy that Americans enjoy, to keep those Americans safe from communist threat knocking on our back door in Latin America. For a change, the drug user will contribute to our society. Isn't that incredible? He's telling you, folks, he stands by his decision. He's telling you that the tool, the mechanism, the tool for this, all of this action is cocaine to get you dependent on it. All right? And he's standing by this. He's proud of this. He's at the point of bragging, okay? You got to understand that. Now, and it's the same way with the heroin. You know, this show was filmed in rural northern Vermont. And through my job, I get to see a lot of people in society, whether, you know, with drug dependency. And I remember when we went into Afghanistan, I told some coworkers of mine, I said, we are going to see an incredible amount of heroin here within a year. And I will tell you, folks, my prediction was absolutely true. The overdose of heroin on young people, even in northern Vermont, is appalling. It's incredible. It's incredible. And what's taken place? The CIA is financed with black ops money. The people allow the authority of law enforcement to stop this problem. They allow the transfer of tax revenue into policing agencies to stop this problem. Okay? What's taking place? Your children are becoming dependent. Your children are dependency on the drug. Your children are ruining their lives. Your children are burdened with the laboring for the financing of this whole operation. The profiteers profit, and you bleed. And not to mention what we have done to the Iraqi and Afghanistan people, all in the name of Key Bono, who is profiting here. Dick Cheney, all right, big position at Halliburton, KRB, gets appointed. Yes, I said appointed. You're not elected, folks, like Bill Clinton. Okay, Bill Clinton played the game. He was governor of Arkansas. He had the available tools and mechanisms to keep local law enforcement out of the operation. The National Security Agency and the Army Security Agency had the high echelon tools and mechanisms to keep the satellite grids and all that free so they can fly this stuff in. The mafia already had the distribution points and logistics set up, much like Coca-Cola would, you know, for their products, or Pepsi-Cola, whatever. It was all set up. So you have an illegitimate, supposedly criminal, unlawful organization working with a supposedly benevolent, lawful organization. And who's financing all three of them? You are. And your children are. And this is what you've got to understand, folks. And if there's anything you're going to get out of this show, this segment right now, is Key Bono. Who is benefiting from all these actions? Okay? And listen to what he says. I stand by my decisions. The tool is cocaine. The trick is to understand that the drug user had the freedom to make a choice, and they chose the drug. I chose to use their habit to finance this operation. Okay? So when you look into what's going on with regards to these stops for drinking, you know, and folks, my father's generation would never have stood still and stood by while the police set up roadblocks in this country to blow in my tube and see if you've been drinking. Okay? And I'm not advocating drunk driving. Absolutely not. But with rights come responsibilities. And with the responsibilities, you've got to ask questions. Okay? And all the documentaries that we've shown in the last 5 weeks, I think you have got to come to the conclusion that questions need to be answered. They're very hard questions, and they're going to be particularly difficult answers. So with that being said, folks, again, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch our program. I hope you have enjoyed the program, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And as always, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.